Our guest this episode is Ruth van Vierzen, a trusted partner to business leaders who want to grow revenue without the overhead. She specializes in two high-impact areas: fractional sales leadership and results-driven sales training. Ruth steps in to plug the gaps, bringing structure, strategy, and momentum to your sales efforts so your team consistently hits quota. On the training side, she equips reps with real-world skills to build relationships, prospect with confidence, follow up effectively, and stay accountable. Here to discuss building strong sales teams and driving consistent revenue, please welcome to the podcast, Ruth van Vierzen. Ruth, welcome.
Welcome to the Engaging Personalities Podcast. I'm Anders Belanger, founder and CEO of Engagify, where we're on a mission to rehumanize business through engagement. We believe that we can all be more successful if we can command attention and deepen connection. So stick around to the end of the show and we'll reveal how you can be our next guest on a future episode. So let's get ready to engage.
Hi, great to be here.
Excellent. So Ruth, I always like to kind of start at the start often, and just how did you come into sales in the first place? I always find, especially salespeople, tend to have an interesting story and how that happens.
Yeah, I actually started in sales as a teenager. I door-to-door selling back in the day when Avon, things like that, when it was the way for for women primarily to make money. I lived in a small rural community and jobs were not very plentiful for teenagers need to make money. So I started that way and realized that I really like it. I'm a real people person. I'm extroverted, so I love meeting new people. So it's kind of a good fit for me. And then from there, I just kept kind of gravitating into jobs that required me to do sales. And I've done a mix of B2B and I started in B2C and then I gravitated towards B2B in my own business. I actually started many years ago when I started my business. It was actually focusing on doing career counseling and career services for companies. But because of my business background, business owners would ask me to kind of get involved in other aspects of their business, which included sales. And then I realized, I really like doing the sales part of it. So that just over time, I just made my primary focus doing sales support for companies.
Excellent. So there's a school of hard knocks there with the old door-to-door kind of thing. And you learn to deal with rejection or you're not going to be successful. Because that's just built into it. I'm curious, now that you're working with, sales teams in different companies, what are you seeing out there as far as do people have the resilience needed for sales? Talk about that a little bit.
I think they do. One thing about the sales profession is that there's a high turnover rate. And you can see this when you look at sales professionals, particularly in their LinkedIn profiles. You'll quite often see that, they're in a job for 1 or 2 years, then they move on to a different sales role. And I think that's partly the personality of people who are in sales is that they love change and challenge. But I think also it's that there's, I think quite often that there's not a good fit or what they're needing in the company isn't there or vice versa, right? So I think that one of the biggest challenges companies face is this high turnover of sales professionals. So in terms of your question around resilience, I think that sales reps have the potential to be more resilient, but they don't necessarily come into the role with that resilience. And that could be causing some of that tendency to job hop. If I'm trying to make a connection here in terms of resilience and job hopping. Yeah.
I think too, a lot of people do fall into sales, right? The whole, do people set out to do that or do they kind of, end up doing? So, there's a little,
I think a lot of people, whether they fall into sales or they go into sales, I think until they get into the role, they may not realize just how demanding the role is. And that the business owners have really set and high expectations. As the sales professional, the owner's depending on you to generate revenue for the company. Your role helps to keep the company afloat. And it's one thing to say, I love the idea of sales. I can kind of, have more autonomy. I get to, do this more challenging work. But sales is a very demanding role. And, I think your word resilience is a really important one that we maybe don't talk about enough in sales. It's, do you have the staying power to do the day-to-day work that is over the long term is going to generate those results, right? Sales is more of a long-term play that I think a lot of sales professionals maybe don't realize, and that companies maybe don't realize. If you're losing sales reps quickly, if you're having that high turnover, you've lost all of that investment, right? And you're not necessarily getting that long-term payoff from that initial work that the sales rep was doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely sales is a sink or swim kind of scenario, right? They have to be delivering value, but at
Yeah.
the same time, the whole taking care of salespeople and making sure that they're compensated properly and all of that is well, it's a big thing for business owners, and I think that's why they bring in people like you, to manage those expectations and rewards and everything that happens. I'm curious, when you come in as a fractional chief revenue officer, or on the sales side of things, how do you come in and establish that rapport and trust you need with these existing sales teams, because they're like, who the heck's this? Like, I don't know, do you get that, and how do you get over that hump?
On a good note, I have found that for the most part, sales reps are very receptive to working with someone like me, a third party sales trainer, sales process builder. And it's actually been rare that they're not open to it. Where they're not, sometimes you get those lone wolf sales reps, or the reps who are just, they're so stuck in their ways that they're not open to coaching or doing things a new way. So that does take more time. What I'll do is focus on the ones who are receptive and who are kind of chomping at the bit to get that coaching and the training. But that is one thing that, any business owners listening to this episode should really take away from this conversation. It's that their sales reps likely want more coaching and support than they're getting.
Right.
Yeah. So I would have that conversation with them, ask them what they want and need, and find out where they're struggling, because that's not something they will necessarily initiate coming to tell you. But chances are, if their numbers are lower than you'd like them to be, it could be because they're struggling with how to prospect effectively. So yeah, I'd say on a good note, most reps are really open to working with me.
Yeah, they want the support, be shown the love in a
Yes.
sense of a proper sales, department, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where you're coming in to fill that gap, is probably a bit of a relief in some ways.
Yes, relief. That's absolutely the word. And
Hallelujah.
yes. And sales reps do want structure. If a company can find the balance of giving sales reps structure and process within the system, they will embrace it. They will grow your revenue. So it's finding a balance of giving them structure, but not like micromanaging too much, like giving them structure, but still autonomy to run with it, right? And apply it and get results. But if your company doesn't have structure, and if you're not giving sales reps a commission structure that is clear to them that they can work towards, that's another big gap, right? And they want that. If they're on commission, they want to know what does that mean for them? What's the structure around that?
Well, you need to motivate them, right? Like they are that
Yes.
do the behavior and then reward quickly, give them the pat on the back, and reaffirm that behavior. Now, you talked about that gap of not having the commission structure in place, or it being clear. What are some of the other common gaps? Because you have that perspective of seeing all these different organizations. You come in and it must be a little bit like Groundhog's Day all over again. Like, oh, here we go, right? We're seeing this now.
Yeah.
Can you kind of speak to some of those gaps that are pretty common?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and there are common gaps. So any business leaders watching this, they're not alone. If they're like, oh my God, that's my company. It's very common for there to be common gaps across companies. I find, and this is where my training focuses for this specific reason, I find that the gaps are typically in prospecting and follow-up. And quite often companies don't have their sales reps doing sales meetings in a consistent way. So they kind of let them have a free for all. They can each kind of do it in their own way. And then the company's brand isn't being represented correctly or properly. So I would say look at first how your sales reps are prospecting. You need to start there. And if they don't have a structure, or if they're struggling with their prospecting, or what I see quite often is that sales reps aren't using the CRM either at all, or they're not using it correctly. And nowadays, CRMs are just
Amazing.
brilliant. Oh,
Yeah.
they're such an amazing tool. And because of the competition in the CRM market, they've had to develop tools exponentially to keep up with each other for competition. So you look at any of the big names on the market today, and they are so robust with what they're doing with AI and workflows. They can really cut down on a sales rep's daily repetitive tasks by automating those things and freeing the sales rep to do more tasks that are more productive and more results driven.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, the CRM thing is such a classic kind of, if it's not in the CRM, it's not real, right? Like you want to get compensated, make sure it's in the CRM, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that like, I mean, and that gives structure too, right? Like you got sales stages, things that need to be checked, workflows that can come off that to, give that structure. Let's get into, your sales training here. So do you have a philosophy of your own? Do you were you inspired by other sales trainers? Because I mean, in some ways, there are sales principles out there, and there's different ways to achieving certain goals. But how would you kind of describe, your style of sales training and maybe where you were inspired in the first place?
Mm-hmm. It was actually working with my client companies that inspired me to create my training program, because I was seeing the same challenges over and over again. And what I was seeing also is that, because inevitably companies will ask me to help them on the hiring side when they're looking to bring on or to coach a new rep that they've just brought on. So I was seeing the same challenges over and over again. So I thought, I'm going to create like a training program that is it's all video based, and that way sales reps can do the training at their own pace, but it's also assignment driven. So they'll get feedback on their assignments, and the whole idea is that they earn they earn while they're learning. So it's applied learning. So the key thing is my training focuses on these areas of prospecting, follow up, and how to do effective sales meetings in a way that sets you apart from your competition. So you're not just, just a talking head on a Zoom call, right? Which is what a lot of sales reps are doing. So it's my training is it's very step by step. It's very guided. And it's very practical. It's about how do you use your CRM effectively? How do you set up a follow-up process and a cadence? And what do you do at each step of the follow-up? So it's very drilled down. And I know that is what sales reps are needing. And company owners need that. So if you're a small business owner and you don't have any sales structure in place for your sales reps, this is the training that will help them do a lot of it on their own. So you don't have to be holding their hand. They're going to get that guided training. Yeah.
And that's the thing too, when we were just talking earlier about the turnover of salespeople, like in my experience too, just like onboarding, it's like, oh, here we go again. So the idea that you systemize that, video training, just get them up and running, takes so much off the business owner. Just again, have a repeatable way of doing that, right? That's
absolutely. Yeah.
Now there is something, if you hire someone on and they're starting to fall short of targets, like, do you have kind of what do they call that now? A personal, what do they call it? There's a PP something plan. Do you use those kind of, what I'm talking about when I said those letters? Not an IPP. That's something in the schools. But anyways,
like a performance plan.
Yeah, that's a performance plan. Yeah, that gets them on track. Like what do you do? Do you kind of come in and hold them by the hand to kind of get them back on track, or do you have a special playbook that you use?
So I always do, if I haven't worked with them before, I'll do a gap assessment with them. And I always do a gap assessment when I start working with a sales rep, because I want to get a sense. I know the areas that they should be working on. I want to get a sense of how they feel they're doing. So I'll have them rate themselves, and then I'll look at their actual, I'll look at their CRM, I'll look at their tools, and I'll get a sense of what they're doing day to day to see if their activities are enough and if they're working towards the activities that the company expects them to be doing. So yeah, I definitely, and this is really where one-on-one coaching is so important for sales reps. A lot of companies tend to just send their sales reps on group training, which is
Mm,
good. The sale, like, I think, sales reps should always be getting new training, right? Year in and year out. But the challenge there is that if you're not doing individual coaching, you're not going to identify where individual reps are needing coaching in one particular area. So one rep might struggle with follow-up, whereas another rep struggles with having confidence in sales meetings. You have to address those things individually.
yeah. There was something you were saying earlier too about, some of these gaps and the talking head. We
Mhm.
definitely shifted into like training salespeople doing virtual engagement during the pandemic. That was
Yeah.
a big thing. When we talk about engagement a lot, obviously on the podcast.
Yeah.
What are you seeing out there in terms of engagement skills with that newer generation of SDRs, BDRs coming up, into the sales force? Are you optimistic about sales futures, or are you like, we've talked to some people who talk about a sales apocalypse, about people not really getting those people skills developed enough to be effective, BDMs or account executives, as they
Mhm.
mature into the sales force, if you
Mhm.
will. What are you seeing out there, Ruth?
Uh, I'm seeing what I think that the newer generations are doing really well is using tech for
Sure.
follow-up. So text and there's someone actually that I was looking at a vendor for a particular service and didn't end up going with them at the time. They have been brilliant at following up using primarily text messaging, and then they'll do an email. But that's, I think, where they're doing very well. It's I would say that there's work that needs to be done on this kind of thing, right? On the human to human interaction. And what I see consistently is a lack of effort being put into doing some research ahead of the call. So as a vendor, or sorry, as a business owner, I'm often on calls with vendors that I'm looking to potentially hire, but they're not the only one. I'll be looking at two or three others as well. And we have to remember that. Like, we all have competition, right? We're not the only game in town. So what I'm seeing is so here's an example. It's quite common now, before you go on a call, as part of a lead qualification process, you'll be asked to fill out a form, answer a whole bunch of questions so that we understand if you're a good fit, and it helps us prepare for the call. I did a call a couple weeks ago with a marketing agency, and I had filled out that lengthy Google form, and the person hadn't even gone to my website.
Oh, yeah.
So and I'm like, well, if I'm a potential customer, and you want me to pay for your services, but you don't even have the time or the interest to even,
Yeah.
check me out at all in advance, to me, that's not acceptable. And they lost my business. I decided not to go with them because to me, that communicated a lack of interest. So
Hmm.
they weren't engaged with me as a potential customer. So anyone listening, I would encourage you, like, even before coming on to this podcast as a guest with you, I have gone to your assets, your website, I've listened to your podcast multiple times in preparation. And though that's the kind of work we should be doing as part of, putting our best foot forward, right? When we're because I'm taking up your time on, being interviewed as a guest, which I greatly appreciate. And I want to make sure that I'm coming here prepared. So every sales rep should be going on a call well prepared. And that means understanding who your prospect is and doing that homework initially.
Yeah. Yeah, there's kind of almost a respect thing built into
Yeah.
that too, right? Like that you've put the time in and you respect the
Yes.
opportunity, the time that you have with that person.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, I have a question for you about, companies that you help. Do you have an example of a time that you kind of came in and were able to really turn things around? Like, just, and maybe this happens all the time, but just this kind of idea of certain moves you made that were critical to really ramp up the sales side of things.
Yes, I tend to like to move quite quickly, but and especially from a production side, companies can't always necessarily match that, right? In terms of new sales being generated. But I think of one in particular where it was a manufacturer that had retained me because they didn't have any sales processes in place. And it was that very common situation where the founders, owners were doing a lot of the sales initially, but they were ramping up with sales hires and they needed consistency. So they had hired me and things were going very well and they were really pleased with, use of the CRM and all of that. And, but what ended up happening is that the sales reps were generating sales but they ultimately couldn't keep up with the production, couldn't keep up with the new sales growth. So they ended up kind of ending work with me temporarily because they're like, we need to figure out actually how we're going to meet the demand for the new sales. So that was like a really positive one because it proved that everything was working to generate new sales. But unfortunately, on the production side, they just couldn't keep up with it. So
Right.
yeah,
You need capacity to be able to fill those orders, right?
yes,
So
yeah, exactly. Well, and
Uh,
to fill the orders without jeopardizing customer service, right, in your brand. So,
right.
so that's really important as well. You need to be able to handle that growth for sure.
Yeah. Not just get it out the door, but make sure, there's the
Yeah,
customer service, the customers have what they need. So they want to
yeah,
be a repeat customer and that sort of
yeah.
thing. Yeah. What size of company, is looking to, hire on a fractional, sales leader in a sense? Because I mean, you get too big and then they're probably going to have their own, right? So there's kind of
Yeah.
this sweet spot that you find. What does that
Yeah.
sweet spot look like?
Yeah, I typically work with companies that are they typically are in revenue 5 million and up. So they're typically smaller companies. So I'd say anywhere from 5 to 50 million. They have about it really varies in terms of employee size, but typically their sales departments will have maybe 1 to 10 sales reps. And anywhere from 10 to 100 employees. So it does vary in terms of employee count, but in terms of revenue, anywhere from that 5 to 50 million is pretty
Mhm.
typical. Yeah.
Are they also typical, like you had just mentioned in that example of the founder being fairly involved, growing it up from the ground up,
Hmm.
being that kind of, point person for sales, and then being successful because they were the founder, but
Yeah.
then they don't have that structure because,
Hmm.
is that kind of a common pattern that you see as well?
Yeah, I would say that's actually typically been the companies that I work with. They have been founder sales led, and then what's happened is that they're just wearing so many hats, and they recognize that they've got these growth plans, but they can't do it all, and they can't do enough sales to meet their growth goals. So that's often I get called in when they realize that they need to get more structure in place. Typically, they'll have sales reps, but it's been very kind of haphazard, right? So again, no, I wouldn't want to say the Wild West, but they just recognize that they need more structure for their sales reps. So the thing about founder-led sales is that it's because the founders, well, first of all, they were often bootstrapping their companies initially. They were able to grow sales because they have the industry connections. They're respected in their field, and most importantly, they're really passionate about what they do, right? So it's very easy quite often for founders to generate those sales. Not always as easy for them to then transfer all of that onto their sales reps, because quite often, I would say inevitably, sales reps are not going to have the same passion for the business that you do. They might love it, they might love the industry, but it's your baby, right?
Hmm.
So it's recognizing that you have the passion to inspire the sales reps, but they need the processes to do what you need them to do. So yeah, it's a very common. Anyone listening to this who's currently managing sales as a founder or doing sales, they really should be thinking ahead, to a year from now, 2 years from now. How do they want their sales to be handled and growing? And it can't be them doing it all.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
not reasonable for long-term growth.
It's in and that idea of, and what you just talked about, pulling out the good pieces out of the founder's head,
Yeah.
creating structure,
Yeah.
putting that into the sales process, teaching that, cascading that down to the rest of the sales team.
Yeah.
That's a lot of work. Like that's all that like sales enablement, sales, like all the structure and the content and the trainings.
Mhm.
So yeah, there's always going to be room or work for people like you, Ruth. I believe,
Yeah.
because that's the founders come up and they're good at also producing whatever widget, kind of piece, right? But yeah, you were going to say something?
Yeah, well, I think, quite often, I find it's a mixed bag. Like there are some founders who they actually love doing sales, right? And they are really good at it. So it can be a little bit difficult for them to remove themselves from the sales role. And what I encourage them to do, if they really love the sales component and getting out meeting new people, what I say to them is keep doing that. Like my goal is not to ever remove the owner from the sales if they love doing it, but they should be doing it at a higher level where they're going and networking with their peers at association events, and then they hand off the lead or the contact to a sales rep. So they're more like the big whale stuff, and then
Yeah.
let the sales reps do the implementation.
The rainmaker, if you will,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
let the founder be the founder in all those special ways that only they can be.
Yes.
And then the other,
Yeah.
backfill with the other side of things with the
Yeah.
sales team. Yeah, that's good.
Absolutely.
Hey Ruth, how can people reach out to you? If they're looking, if they're that right size, maybe they're a founder-led company. Where's the best place to find you?
The best place is LinkedIn, I would say. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. Also, they can go to my website, revsquared.com. And I've got lots of information there. I've got some free resources, and they can book a call with me at any time. I'm always happy to do a no obligation call and talk about where they're at and see if we're a fit.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast and sharing with us your philosophy and how you help companies with their sales teams. And appreciate your time.
Thank you. It's a good conversation. Thank you.
All right. And to all of our listeners, thank you for tuning in once again. And until next time, you know what to do. Stay engaged.
Thank you so much for listening to Engaging Personalities. If you believe this world needs more engagement and you're an industry leader or you have an interesting take on rehumanizing business, go to go.engagify.ai/podcast-guest to apply and come on the show. If you got something out of this interview, do you mind sharing it on your social media? Just grab a quick screenshot with your phone and text it to a friend or post it on the socials. If you know someone that would be a great guest, tag them on social media to let them know about the show. Include the hashtag Engaging Personalities. I love seeing your posts and guest suggestions. We are regularly putting out new episodes and content. To make sure you don't miss any episode, go ahead and subscribe. Your thumbs up, ratings, and reviews go a long way to help promote the show and mean a lot to me and my team. Want to know more? Go to our website, engagify.ai, or follow me on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening and stay engaged.